A lot of people are afraid to spend it, which is fine because we're still in these early days of volatility and the price still growing and growing, and these predictions of $1 million and $10 million valuations just make people really hold it. I still spend Bitcoin. I use it as a business. If you're now comfortable holding Bitcoin in your treasury, then you're going to start to want to accumulate more Bitcoin, which I think then we start to see businesses, adopting Bitcoin as a medium of exchange. Unfortunately, MicroStrategy doesn't even do this. They have 500,000 Bitcoin and, you can't even buy their swag with Bitcoin. If we go back to what Satoshi was trying to do here, it's about separation of money estate. It's about the new money, and money is something you earn, you save it, and you spend it.
Hi, Craig. How are you doing? Good to have you back on the show.
Yeah, good. Really cool. Super happy to be here. Like I was saying earlier, I'm super impressed on how your channel's grown, and you've had some really, really great interviews. I'm really grateful. I was one of your early days, before you exploded. So it's great to be back.
Yeah, I even was in my fiat job still. So when I did it, when I recorded the podcast with you, I was basically still working, I think 30 hours of 25 hours on the side in my fiat job. So it's come a long way.
Totally. It's amazing. It's so great to watch. And it's a testament to how Bitcoin's growing and, how much there's a thirst for that knowledge and hearing what's going on. And, it just helps. It helps Bitcoin adoption. So it's great to see your success because it just shows how important it is.
Yeah. And I think when we recorded, there was just the ETF launch, or maybe not even the ETF launch. So it was right at, there's so much happening in 1 year in Bitcoin. It's kind of crazy.
Very true. You're right. There's so much building going on in so many areas of Bitcoin. You're right. The ETFs we're just kind of in the midst of kind of, trying to get approvals and, all that happened, and then tons of development going on, in the sense of, on the mining side, on the, user adoption side, just so much going on. This is what I love about Bitcoin is there's so many rabbit holes to go down and so much to learn and just so much going on.
Absolutely. Maybe let's start directly there with the adoption which has been happening. There is obviously the ETF now. Maybe tomorrow there's something crazy launching with SPR with Donald Trump, but we don't know. People that listen to this probably already know. And there is outside of that everywhere circular economies popping up. There is the meetups, as you said. There is events getting always bigger and bigger. The conferences getting bigger and bigger. So there's so many different angles. How do you look at adoption? How do you even, how are we even measuring adoption? And what are you kind of looking at of events and measuring this kind of adoption that's going on?
Oh, measuring it, it's interesting. I see two kind of angles to this. I think, the fiat value of, Bitcoin and, the store of value, the whole asset view, that's what we're seeing with the ETFs. It's being sold to investors. It's being sold to traders, hey, this is a new stock, a new asset, right? And so I think we're getting a lot of that crowd over the last year is people going hey, I'm going to, move my money into MicroStrategy, strategy now. And I'm going to hold it there, right? They would hold gold or silver or a mutual fund or whatever. So we're getting that crowd coming in, that are looking at Bitcoin purely as, an asset that's going to, a place to save their money and grow their money. So I think we're seeing a lot of that. And so we're, I notice this a lot on X is we're seeing those people, and that the conversation is really about, the value of Bitcoin in fiat terms and the swings, oh, it's up, it's down. And so I think that helps kind of pull people into the discourse, into the conversation about Bitcoin, which is good. But I think there's also the conversation about, the growth and the adoption of the use of Bitcoin. And I think if you look at, the hardcore Bitcoiners, they're starting more to talk about that of it's not just something you save. Again, what's the if we go back to what Satoshi was trying to do here, it's about separation of money estate. It's about, the new money, and money is something you earn, you save it, and you spend it, and I think a lot of people are afraid to spend it, which is fine because we're still in these early days of, volatility and the price, still growing and growing, and these predictions of $1 million and $10 million valuations just make people really hold it. And so, I still spend Bitcoin, I use it. And I think, as we see, I like the things like the development that's going on with using it. Like Nostr is a good example where, people are using, they're zapping sats, like micropayments going on where people are actually using it. They're starting to build those use cases. So I'm looking at both of those coins. I think it's good to see these, traders and, the holders kind of coming into the market, but it's a moment to educate them. So they're starting to look at what am I holding here? And hopefully that's making the transition and the education to bringing people more into like, oh, this is not just digital gold. There's more to it. And, lots of development going on that usage side that I think just doesn't get as much attention, and requires it. So I think those are the two kind of, the ways I'm measuring it is the progress in those areas. And so it's definitely interesting to watch because I think we're seeing it with the holders and the traders. They're bringing the Wall Street thinking to Bitcoin, and that's just one small aspect of it. So I think lots of work to do, lots of learning to happen, but those are that's what I'm seeing right now, I guess, over the last year.
Yeah, there's this TradFi coming into Bitcoin. I mean, literally ETFs, and now at the second year of the ETF, which is interesting because ETFs usually take a little bit to really get into full swing, and this process usually take like half a year to a year. So it will be really interesting also to see how's the second year of the ETF going, and then like the nation states, and it's like there's a lot of different players now into Bitcoin. How did you see the impact of that currently?
Yeah, the nation state stuff is very interesting. I don't know if you've kind of seen me on X. Like, I'm not like I don't care about governments holding Bitcoin. Like, I think there's been a huge push with that, and again, I think the huge push, coming from like Bitcoin Magazine and some of these other kind of like groups, is really about trying to legitimize it, and I think the better thing is like, don't add capital gains to Bitcoin. Like all those things are probably more important than, governments holding it. Like I keep saying on X, hey, everybody here, you, me, and, everybody needs a strategic Bitcoin reserve. Like we all need to get off zero and, holding Bitcoin. And I think, again, it's more of, to me, the government side is like marketing. Right? It's like just another conversation to get more people thinking about it and more, maybe it legitimizes it so that, the average consumer is kind of like, okay, now it's not that secret shadowy money that only, drug dealers and hackers use, which I think, is still the Discord and maybe some of the, the less educated, part of the consumers out there. So, I think that's part of it. But again, what we're seeing right now, like with, the US and, their strategic crypto reserve and all that, like, I think there's just, there's just a little too much influence going on there in regards to, all these other tokens and stuff like that. I think there's really like VC, a VC kind of in charge of crypto is really taking it from a different angle. And, I don't know. There's obviously challenges with that. So I think it's good for the Discord. It's good for pumping people's bags per se. But, at the end of the day, I go back to adoption. And like, this is where we need to move this, that's part of the same TradFi group, I guess, that's kind of into Bitcoin right now. They're not Bitcoiners. They're people, again, looking at it as just digital gold, purely as a store of value that's going to go up forever. Right. And so that's fine. So I care more about maybe for the marketing message of it getting more legitimacy out to the general population about this, and maybe governments relaxing their Bitcoin laws and things like that because the US is now, becomes a holder, which they already are. But, so I see it as that. as probably the better part of it. I don't know. We'll see what happens this week, as they bring all these different kind of crypto CEOs to the White House to talk about it. So, we'll see what happens, I guess, there.
Absolutely. And it's also a good message of like, we should cheer for grassroots adoption and plebs buying Bitcoin and not for nation states. Like Bitcoin is not here to make nation states and then governments and maybe even central banks more powerful. It's the other way around.
100%. Like Bitcoin is about peer-to-peer without a third party, right? Like it's about empowering the people. So I think that's the message that's been getting drowned out a lot, because of the TradeFi people coming for the gains, right? So again, this is why I been working on our meetup and growing that. Education is the key, right? It's really about teaching people and, putting out a clearer message about, what Bitcoin is here to do. But again, it's a balance, right? We wouldn't have the opportunity to educate people if they weren't kind of brought in for the, holy cow, how is Bitcoin $100,000, right? So I think it's a balance that we have to play with. But again, at the end of the day, Bitcoin doesn't care. It'll do what it does, and it's going to react, I guess, to the market. But in the end of the day, we all know if you're a pleb and you kind of really have dove into this subject, you know where it's going in the long run.
What do you think is the most important thing that we could do to enhance Bitcoin adoption? I guess it's orange pilling our neighbors and like bringing it into the grassroots, I guess.
Yeah, I think one of the aspects of, what Seyr is doing with strategy and, Bitcoin adoption at the corporate level and having businesses hold, Bitcoin. And I think that's an important part, because I think once you, as a business, if you're now comfortable holding Bitcoin in your treasury, then you're going to start to want to accumulate more Bitcoin, which I think then we start to see businesses, adopting Bitcoin as a medium of exchange. That's kind of where I'm hoping we're starting to go. So now, unfortunately, MicroStrategy doesn't even do this, like they have, 500,000 Bitcoin and, you can't even buy their swag with Bitcoin. Right? You still got to use fiat. So to me, I think the next phase here is legitimizing businesses to hold it and then now getting businesses to accept it, right? Because let's say if Amazon started accepting Bitcoin directly, people start to use it as a medium of exchange. And I think that's the kind of that's the next direction we're going. That's where we need to get to, because I think that, again, making it a medium of exchange brings it closer to money. Now, I know, Michael Seyr, I don't know whether it's political or not, but, he very much focuses on store of value and not so much medium of exchange. And I don't know if that narrative is political at this stage where he's, trying to get maybe certain policies or certain kind of regulations in place before, maybe he changes his tune back to what, Satoshi was really talking about. But we'll see. But I think business adoption is a huge part. And again, orange pilling, people, obviously that's always the goal. But yeah, we just need more businesses that are accepting it and feel comfortable accepting it, right? Because I think a business is much more regulated than an individual, in the sense of, a lot of people will a lot of plebs will maybe live under the radar, and accept Bitcoin, and they're, they're not as scrutinized as businesses are from the government and from banks and stuff like that. So, a lot of companies have been getting unbanked, because they're in the Bitcoin or crypto space. And so I think that's where, I think we'll see a bit more comfort in that. And then they start to accept Bitcoin. So that's where I'm hoping things go. That's where I think things are going,
Yeah. And for that, we also need kind of top down things, because if all of a sudden governments are starting to adopt it, buy it, maybe even like accept it for taxes and stuff like that, then the unbanked stuff and those kind of things also slowly go away, and then businesses are not as afraid to adopt it as also as a medium of exchange. So I think there's like all those small pieces that they come together, and at some point it all makes sense. But it also seems early for spending it. I mean, I'm already accepting it for my podcast. I take sponsorships already in Bitcoin. Most of my income actually is already in Bitcoin. I also pay post-production already in Bitcoin. But it seems like it's like how as early Bitcoin as a store of value was in like 2010, it's now the medium of exchange side of things for Bitcoin, because like it's still hard to to pay things in Bitcoin.
Yeah, very much so. It's the infrastructure is still coming. Like we've got BTC Pay server and things like that for doing that. LN bits, like having people running their own Lightning servers or nodes and things like that. So I think that there's still lots of work to do there, but it's definitely happening. Everything in Bitcoin happens slowly because it seems to have to happen correctly. You know what I mean? Like this is why you can't change, Bitcoin core very quickly. It takes massive amounts of consensus. And I think, that's similar with this is getting it right. So you're right. Like people are like yourself, you're starting to live on a Bitcoin standard. It's not going to be a light switch moment. It's going to be, little bits at a time. And, and then you talking about that and you teaching people that it's possible. You still look out there on X and all of the crypto people, still think Lightning is slow, and they still they just kind of, there's so much rhetoric out there, and things change so fast, in this world that, a narrative from a year ago is outdated, because tech has improved and liquidity on Lightning has improved and there's more nodes out there and more channels. And so it's like everything changes so fast. And, when a Satoshi was worth, nothing, a couple of years ago, now we're approaching on, a tenth of a penny, right? Like it's starting to, the value keeps going up. And so, I don't know. I think it just takes time, and I'm ready. I just wrote an article that I'm going to post later this week on, how to get onto a Bitcoin standard. And as I was researching this, like there's so many ways to do it now and so many different companies that, helping bridge that gap where, if you want to buy at the Gap, you can get, gift cards, that allow you, buying gift cards with your Bitcoin to then buy at those stores, like that is a bridge right now. Whereas eventually you'll be able to buy directly at Gap. And so to me, it's like, we're still in the early days of really being able to bridge the two economies, the fiat economy and the Bitcoin economy.
Will it be a bridge or replacement long term? I mean, obviously not anytime soon, but is it more of like an integrating Bitcoin or as a replacing the fiat system?
I think we're going to integrate before we replace. Like it's again, it's not going to be a light switch moment where all of a sudden, these businesses stop accepting fiat, right? Like we're going to be in parallel world for a long time. Like look at the internet, if you go back to the early days, bookstores are a great example, right? Like we still have bookstores, physical bookstores, right? And physical bookstores are like fiat. And then the internet came along, right? And they created online bookstores like Amazon and Chapters and Indigo and all these other ones, right? And so they started to, consumers started to go into this new online world, this new internet-based buying thing. But again, we still have physical bookstores. So I think, it's going to take a while. I think we're going to live in a parallel world for quite some time. But yeah, the bridge right now, it is a bridge, right? You kind of have to still jump back into the fiat world to interact with some of these corporations who aren't on a Bitcoin standard, don't accept Bitcoin. But eventually, like I said, as business adoption kind of grows, I think those bridges will change. You won't buy gift cards anymore to exchange for fiat to buy. You'll probably move into you'll buy directly with Satoshis, to these companies. And we're already seeing it. It's just slow moving, I also think the whole social media aspect of of getting consumers to start using Satoshis, like on Nostr. We're looking at Rumble, the YouTube competitor who's now been orange pilled. I think we'll start to see him, bringing in, Bitcoin as a medium of exchange on their platform for people like yourself. You get paid probably by YouTube in fiat and have to then convert that into, Bitcoin, to some extent. And so, what if YouTube started paying you directly in Bitcoin? I think that's the direction we'll see Rumble go. And so it takes time, right? That's all infrastructure that needs to be built. That's not, super easy, but that's how things go mainstream, right? Is when a mainstream brand starts to leverage Bitcoin and really understand it. So we'll see.
I think I have maybe an interesting example and or comparison. I'm really curious on what you think about that. We see the adoption of the car is something that really fascinates me in that regard. Here you have New York City, and you have like 1900, so you have like one car here, and most of that is like horse carriers. And if you go just like 13 years later, there's mostly cars on the road, and there's like some horses. So the adoption went really quick, but in Austria, I live in Vienna, you can still see horse carriages, especially if you go out on a Sunday and where it's sunny and a good one. People still like to go in those vintage horse carriers. But it's like 0.0001% of the traffic now in Austria, or like probably also of the world. So most people have now for individual transfer cars. So I think that might be an interesting comparison to make between fiat currencies and Bitcoin, where the adoption goes actually quite quickly, but the fiat thing is longer around than expected.
Yeah, I love this analogy, and I've actually used a similar analogy. When we look at how old Bitcoin is, so many you see here again in the crypto world, boomer coin and how old it is, and I'm like, Bitcoin is still so new. Like, go back, like, when was the automobile invented? In the late 1800s. And 50. Look at the automobiles 15 years after the automobile was invented. It's still made out of wood. It's still this, like, in today's standards of automobiles, like, it is a rickety old rocking chair, and then you look at where we are today, 100 years after, the automobile, and it looks nothing like this thing, right? Like, this is the era we're in right now in Bitcoin. This is the infrastructure for the automobile, 15 years or whatever, 10 years after it was invented. So yes, technology grows faster and all that, but, maybe we're in year 30 if to compare it to this, because technology grows and, develops way faster today. But again, we're still in the early days, right? Like, so there's so much work to be done on layer twos. We're seeing all kinds of things happening, in that kind of space where, it's still developing, and so you're right. I think we will still see a lot of the old stuff around. Like, people look at these vehicles still exist. My wife runs a big car meet up here in Canada, and we go out on Sundays, and there is some like 1900 cars that, collectors bring out. They still run. It's not their daily driver. They're not driving across the country, to go on a trip with these things, but they still exist. And I think fiat money will be, it will be novelty. That's what we'll slowly get to, is novelty, just like coins are. Nobody, we have coin collectors and money collectors. Those things will still exist. I even look at it's the digital cash versus, current cash. Like, in some countries, there's fights going on to keep physical cash, whereas some businesses don't accept physical cash anymore, right? And so we're seeing that world change, even in the fiat, where it's like, oh, here's my coins and paper bills, and they're like, no, we don't accept that. You got to use a debit card because we want to track the transactions, and we don't want cash. It's too messy. It's too hard to deal with, and the business doesn't want to deal in it anymore. and governments are like now forcing businesses, you have to accept cash or no, you don't. And there's whole discussions about that. So, I think it's here to stay for a bit, right? But the smart money is moving in this direction.
Interesting. Yeah, there's one more small thing. I guess brought it up and I never took a look at it before. And now I'm obsessing with that data point so much, where he compared kind of the speed of the adoption of certain technologies, like we have the telephone, electricity, radio, and all of those things. And the internet was way quicker in getting adopted. The social media was way quicker and adopted, and like all the things that come from the internet, like the smartphone, the digital cameras, like social media, all of those things, even like credit cards are here, which is an interesting one. Also to see, and it makes me sometimes wonder, because like we know things get adopted really quick, but money has such a hard network effect. People are so used to money, so it's way harder to adopt something like that. If you think about a new app, it's so easy to install a new social media app. I have a friend of mine, a really good one, wants to get me on Sessions, and Session is a really secure private messenger, and it costs me nothing to install it and make messages with him there. But I'm so reluctant to do that, because it's the fifth or sixth messenger that I use, and I'm like, it's another messenger. Like it's so and it's so hard to get out of the network effects that WhatsApp has and the Telegram has and that Twitter has. And with money, there's a real opportunity cost. People they can lose and win a lot of money, depending on where they go with the thing. You can have two different social media apps, but you cannot have two different standards. You cannot be a fiat standard and Bitcoin standard at the same time. You can only be 50-50 there, which makes me think of, is Bitcoin kind of an exception to this fast adoption cycles of social media and internet? I don't know if you have an opinion on that. I just thought about it when we were talking about it, but it's really interesting to think of like, okay, Bitcoin is money, which is a really hard network effect, but it's also like a technology like AI or the internet. How do you see that topic?
Yeah, I agree with you. It's definitely a lot slower. Money definitely obviously has the best network effects, right? And it's very ingrained. Everybody in the last 100 years has been using government controlled money, right? And so I think moving off of that is a lot more difficult, and it takes a lot more education. And unfortunately, financial literacy around the world is terrible. Like people don't know how their money is created. They don't really know about inflation. So we're getting knowledge on this, and there's just a huge gap in people understanding economics, understanding inflation, understanding, the whole point of money, the history of money. Like this is why we see so many of these books coming out, like Lawrence Lepard's new one, and Lynn Alden, all these new books coming out, and Bitcoin Standard, obviously educating people on money. And I don't think there's been more people learning about money ever before. It was a very niche subject before. It was for people that wanted to go into finance and economics and maybe into like business administration. But like most people just kind of took money for granted, and it is what it is. And there was no option before. So, I think this is a generational change. Like our younger generation has paid more attention to money. There's more knowledge coming out that's kind of contradicting the fiat system. But I do agree. I think it's still going to take time, and it's going to, this is, I guess, again, I keep talking about Nostr. Like these are the killer apps that kind of bring people on. I think I was watching a talk about, somebody, one of the Nostr kind of influencers talking about how, there's lots of Bitcoiners on Nostr, but there's also freedom people and people that maybe learned more about Bitcoin or adopted Bitcoin after they got into Nostr, right? Someone zapped them a few sats and they're like, what the hell's this? They start to look, it's Bitcoin. Oh, this is neat. And they see the value proposition of like, I post a meme and someone's giving me a couple of Satoshis. And so, I think it's those kind of killer apps and those experiences that we need to kind of develop to bring more people into it, right? And so, yeah, I think adoption is going to be slower just because the network effects that money has and also the headwinds, right? Like, who was stopping you from downloading the YouTube app or the WhatsApp? Like, there was no like major like governmental or political pushback, right? And so Bitcoin, yes, it's revolutionary, but the old guard, all the current political parties, the people that have all the politicians all have their own central bank, right? Like, so there's headwinds in the state against something that they already control. So I think, you look at all those other technologies, who was pushing back on the microwave? Nobody. Who is pushing back on social media? Nobody, right? And so I think that's why there's more headwinds for Bitcoin as money because it's trying to replace something that is, cemented into our political arena and into, society. So that's going to take a lot more, right? And I think you see the political landscape that we're having today, America versus so many other countries. And like, there's just, we're getting an us versus them kind of, conversation. Even sovereignty is being pushed right now. Like the whole conversation of sovereignty and countries, with Trump talking about taking Canada or Greenland or, all these kind of things. Like it's now bringing sovereignty into the social discord. And so I think, that's interesting in that, people didn't pay attention to these things before. So again, they start to pay attention, they start to ask questions, and that's what, starts to snowball the effect of people learning these things.
Let's take a break for a moment and appreciate the beauty that Coin Vigilante has made with the Bitcoin watches. Those watches are the most amazing, the most elegant way of showing that you are a true Bitcoiner. And Coin Vigilante just dropped a completely new and amazing Genesis edition of their watch collections. You have the date of the first ever mined Bitcoin block in there, and of course also the block height and which epoch we are currently in. I love the level of detail they put in this masterpiece. Make sure to check out those amazing Coin Vigilante timepieces down in the descriptions. I love those watches so much. And now if you have Bitcoin, I really do hope that you don't have it on exchange. But if you do have it on exchange, I have two ways for you to deal with that. The first way is you put it on a hardware wallet. That's the entry for you to get into the self-custody game. I recommend BitBox, Bitcoin only edition for that. It's a super simple and secure way. And if you check out the link in the description, you even get 5% off if you use the code Robin. And the second way is the Bitcoin Way. The Bitcoin Way is your all-in partner in terms of how to get the most out of your sovereignty. They will personalize for you a self-custody setup that is perfect for your individual situation. They will show you how you can secure your own devices. Securing your Bitcoin is not enough. You also have to keep all your devices secure. One topic that is overlooked often is the inheritance plan. What happens with your Bitcoin once you are no longer here? Do you have a plan for that in place already? And last but not least, if you're in jurisdictions where you don't feel safe, it's better to get a plan B. For all that, head over to thebitcoinway.com/Robin to get a 30-minute free call. And just a quick side note, I will be for the first time ever speaking at the Bitcoin Prague event in June. It will be absolutely legendary and I'm really looking forward to seeing all of you there. You can get your ticket in the link down in the description of Bitcoin Bitcoin Prague. And very important, use code Robin to get 10% off your ticket. I'm really looking forward seeing you there. I love the thing that you said a little bit earlier of like how many people study money right now and how much did they change because of Bitcoin. And I think if Bitcoin breaks tomorrow, that would have been still a massive success just because people started to paying attention what money actually is and what a good money is and what a bad money is and how a money is different from a currency and all those things. I never looked at it that way because it really I think Breedlove probably popularized the question of like what is money, and he kind of positions it as like the defining question of our time. And I think it's a very, very important one. Like what is money and where does it come from and what is the best one? And that is already a major success for Bitcoin because Bitcoin. I never would have questioned what is money without Bitcoin. I was a stock pro before, and Bitcoin made me realize what money is and also made me realize the value of gold.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I worked in a central bank as a technologist, and I worked with economists and people in the treasury. And, when I kind of came across Bitcoin, I learned more about economics than I ever knew and about, the origins of money and the history and like you said, how money is created, and when you start to look at that, you start to really, you get frustrated when you learn that, the Federal Reserve is a private company and, how, we all learn like, oh, 2% inflation is, that's the target. And, everybody's talking that in the news and everybody just accepts that, they're inflating the currency in every country, 2%, since they're stealing 2% of your buying power year over year, which is now even higher in the last few years and even crazier in some countries that have experienced, 200% inflation. So, that information was just kind of normal and not really, whatever came through the 6 o'clock news was just accepted as okay, normal, and the way it is. So, I think we're realizing now that, not only how bad the way it is that there is an alternative. But you're right. The win of people learning about this and the younger generation, even those that are in crypto, and not Bitcoin, kind of maximalists, or if you want to say it, but even they're learning more about money. So there's a whole new area of or a whole new generation of people that are paying attention to something that the previous generations just kind of ignored and accepted for the way it is.
I completely forgot that I think you mentioned it last time that you worked for a central bank. You don't do it anymore, right?
No. I still work in tech and, I still consult, but not to central banks. And, it's interesting. The central bank that I was working at, was more of a regional type bank. And, I've watched them struggle for years. They had technology and they were also, a trade services to other banks, and their margins just got thinner and thinner, and trying to be tech company in a very highly regulated world, building online banking technology and fintech solutions, like it is a tough business to turn a profit in because it's so regulated and because the systems are so antiquated. Like they're still struggling to maintain the banking infrastructure that is super outdated, very complex, and highly regulated. And again, they also struggle to retain talent. You look at the tech talent out there, and do they want to go work for a legacy bank that still has COBOL, running systems and still has Microsoft Access kind of tools that are and they're not going to go there. They're going to crypto companies and Bitcoin companies, and they want to code the future. So a lot of those financial institutions, although they have huge amounts of money, they tend to give it to their executives, and they struggle to recruit highly skilled, top of their game, technical talent to work on the legacy system. It's definitely, they have a a branding challenge there where, I fall into that. It's like, I don't want to, if I wanted to go back into tech and finance, the last place I'm going to go is a bank. It's, unless they're moving into, Bitcoin and they're looking at, the more advanced technologies, so it's definitely interesting.
How do you think banks will adopt Bitcoin? Will it? Are they just gonna either adopt it or just die, or like a micro strategy and like Bitcoin exchanges like Swan and River, like the new banks?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think it's what you said in the beginning. I think there'll be some that adopt and some that will die. And banks are very slow moving to adopt new technology, let alone new money, right? And I think it's such a paradigm shift for those executives. They're the most fiat brained people, right? Like they've lived and breathed the fiat world. They know the tricks, they know the trades, they know how all the regulations work, the Banking Act, all of those things. Like their knowledge base is confined to the fiat system. So like the paradigm shift it requires in their brain to really understand Bitcoin, and then start to evangelize it within their bank where they're already the most resistant because Bitcoin's like basically like going after the banks, right? It's basically saying we don't need this middleman. So how do they, they're going to try to apply fiat kind of like concepts to create a Bitcoin bank. And I was listening to a conversation of the founder of Galoy about this because he's building open source kind of Bitcoin banking technology. And he was asked this similar question of like, what do you think is going to happen? And, I think he kind of more sides on the same aspect of we're going to see the rise of Bitcoin banks, people that are, Bitcoin native from the start, because they understand the user, they understand the ecosystem, and they can grow faster. Whereas, banks are laggards, right? They're not early adopters. They're kind of like, oh, let's bolt on the Bitcoin to our existing thing, and how do we bring it into our existing messy infrastructure of fiat technologies? And so, first mover advantage, you're right. I think the River, I think, those types of companies are the ones that are positioning themselves now as thought leaders and as the innovators in that space. So I don't know. You look in the States, in the last, 10 years, 500 some odd banks have gone belly up just in the US alone. So to me, I don't know. I think they'll continue to make mistakes and those will shut down. Maybe a Bitcoin bank will buy assets from, those and shift people over. But I think it's going to be newcomers. I think it's going to be, Bitcoin companies that rise. Again, I'll go back to the bookstore thing. It wasn't, Craig's Corner bookstore that rose up and became the internet bookstore giant. It was a new incumbent. It was Amazon, somebody that came in and said, I'm going to remodel your business in this new world, in this new internet world. So I think it's the same we're seeing with, companies like River and others, where they're just like, we're going to look at the banking world and we're going to build, on the Bitcoin standard from the beginning.
It's super interesting, and never looked at the data, but like banks are really dying off. I mean, it's already it's clear why. Like you don't need that many banks, especially you don't need the physical banks so much. But it's kind of wow. It's interesting. Never looked at that.
I look up here. So we have, in Canada, we have really just like the big five banks. We have which are really just extensions of our government. Like they're very tightly regulated. Nobody can really start a new bank up here. And then we have our credit union system, which there's credit union system in the United States as well. And these are more like community credit unions where, there's even some of these were started by like the fishermen on the west coast of Canada. They all assembled and they created a credit union, which is like a pseudo bank, and they built a community, around their finances. But if you look at the credit union system over the last 20 years, it's just been consolidating and consolidating and consolidating because their margins are super thin and, they can't keep up with technology. Like running a online banking app and an online banking website costs a lot of money and chews up a lot of margins from just, earning mortgages. And if we look over the last, 10 years where interest rates were so low, like banks weren't, and credit unions weren't earning a lot of interest, interest rates have certainly changed, but huge consolidations going on. The bigger credit unions are buying up all the little ones, and we're going from like hundreds of credit unions down to like, 50 or so. And the trend will continue over the next probably another 20 years. Those financial institutions will shrink down to probably a few dozen because the economies of scale are just not there for them. So, they're either getting bought out, or they're just getting kind of, merged into a larger one, and they just take over their members and their holdings and they dissolve that small little credit union. So yeah, branches are.
It's exactly like 2008 was the high point, and it was basically going up since. For the people that just listen, I basically pulled up a chart from 1934 where there are 3,000 bank branches in the USA, and it has been just going up like crazy since 2008, where the 82,000 bank branches in the US, and now since then it actually has fallen, not that dramatically, but for physical bank branches, it's not digital, like you have to have a process for turning those off, so like there's a delayed process. And this is just 2018, so it already has been 8 more years. It's probably like way lower now, and it has gone down to 77,000. So it's a clear trend, and probably we are right now maybe at like 60,000 or like 70,000 or something like that. If I had to guess now, this is a clear death of the banks. I never looked at that statistics. Really interesting, because like the banks for me is kind of the enemy of Bitcoin.
Yeah. Something I saw a lot of data too, working in the banking system, and, the credit unions is another interesting place where, the average age of the members of these credit unions, is the baby boomer generation. Right. So I think we see this trend, as they kind of, as they kind of like, they're the ones that are driving the existing branches and all that. Like they're still the people that go to the bank, they're still reluctant a lot to use online banking, major things, they go to the branch. And so I think, as we see those generations kind of shift, we're going to see, those branches and those banking kind of relationships, go online and again, just become more self-service, right? Like that's what, millennials, Gen X even, and younger, it's all self-service, same thing with Bitcoin, right? It's all about self-service. So I think we'll see that trend continue. It's just declining.
Yeah. How do you imagine Bitcoin scaling? How do you think is self-custody mainstream? Are we going on Lightning, Fedimint? How do you look at the scaling and the mass adoption of Bitcoin in that way?
Yeah, I think we're going to, Lightning's going to play a big role in that for sure. I think, self-custody will be a part of it. But I also think, like the Galoy Bitcoin Bank is somewhat of a custodial solution. And I think, the hardcore Bitcoiners are going to be like, can't custody anything. But I think there's going to be some aspect where we're going to be, there is going to be some custody kind of involved. Not everybody's going to be able to, cold storage their Bitcoin as much as we want that. Not a lot of people have that much money to cold storage, a huge majority of the global population lives paycheck to paycheck. They don't have enough Bitcoin to steal, right? They're using money as, I got a little bit today. I'm going to go buy groceries and I'm going to pay my rent and I got nothing left over. And so, I think Lightning and some of these, Fedimints and things like that, these community banks where, it's almost like the credit union system in a sense, like that model of community, where, people were like, I don't want to go with the big bank. I'm going to trust my little community bank because I know that, Robin runs the bank, and I know Robin because we play on the same, or, with the same team or whatever, So I think we'll see a bit more of that. And I think that we'll see as kind of onboarding, where people will have somebody to hold their hand. Not everybody is self-driven. Bitcoiners are like, I'll do it all myself. I'm sovereign. I have my citadel, and I'm a one-man army, right? Whereas, we are creatures of community as human beings. So I think Bitcoin brings these better checks and balances, right? Like, today we trust the banks, but ideally they can do whatever they want. Whereas the, technologies like Lightning, all these things, the traceability of Bitcoin, I think make it a little bit easier to trust maybe some, communities or centralized custodial authorities. So I think we'll see that, whether, Bitcoin maxis like it or not. I think, we're going to see it because there'll be a value proposition for people, and that will help things scale, right? Again, not everybody's going to have a ton of money to hold. Like, most people in the world live paycheck to paycheck. Like, us in the Western world, we have huge financial privilege where, a lot of people in the world don't have that. They are not sitting on piles of money. They are not earning piles of money. So, yeah, I think there's going to be a combination of things, and that'll help with scalability. I think, again, bringing people on, and, you look at the Blink app, which is in El Salvador, like that's a custodial app, right? And so, it works. People use it. They're using it at small values. They're not worried about getting, $100 worth of Bitcoin stolen, and nobody's going to, compromise that custodial relationship for that. So I don't know. It's going to be a balance. I think, that's going to help scale to some extent, and bringing people on to feel more safe. Having backup plans with a custodial kind of bank, may bring on a little bit more of the non-technical users, into Bitcoin.
Yeah, and I do think also like collaborative custody could also be a big part of the story, or just like services in general that help you, guide you through that process. And then also like this is probably the way to go for the people that really want to be self-sovereign, of either have collaborative custody or have like someone guiding you. And then there's like this extreme guy that just like also wants to educate and do everything on its own, and don't want anyone to be involved. And then for the other ones, there's maybe a thing like how is it called, BitKey, and those kind of applications where it's really easy. It's like an iOS app. And then on the other side, maybe there are people that's just like, hey, I want to have it on exchange, which is fine. I always encourage people, especially now, to be as self-sovereign and as self-custody as possible. But we also have to be aware of, like, the Bitcoiner from 2012 the average Bitcoiner from 2012 is very different from the average Bitcoiner in 2025, and is very different from the average Bitcoiner in 2050, just because we get bigger. And the crowd is different.
Yeah, I agree with that. I definitely agree. It's evolving constantly. And, I think we're going to have a lot of things. I've been reading a bit more about eCash and these Fedimints, and I think there's something there. It's definitely the privacy aspect is coming back into it. And so, there's going to be more services, and you're right, the Bitcoiners will evolve. It's just the way it is, so I don't think you can really take a super hard line on it, because we got to scale, right? And we got to bring more people on. We got to get more to the, medium of exchange and people using it. And I think we're still in the holding kind of phase of Bitcoin,
We are definitely still in the medium, in the store of value phase. It's still getting adopted. I think sometimes we lose sight of how early we are. Like, go out on the street and ask 100 people, how much money they have in Bitcoin. And most of them say zero, nothing. And some of them might say, oh, what is Bitcoin? And maybe one or two persons say like, oh, like I have some money in Bitcoin. Bitcoin is talking to each other is sometimes an echo chamber and very far away from reality.
Percent. Yeah. You're right. We kind of live and breathe this. We're very interested. We're very early adopters, but you're right. It's just, again, I go back to our earlier conversation, like these things with what's going on with the politics in the States, it brings it into the social discord, makes people talk about it. Like, why would the government even consider this? Well, like now maybe I'm going to read about it. Maybe I'm going to buy the Bitcoin standard now and kind of like, why would the government even consider this? It starts to get people kind of thinking and asking those questions. So yeah, we're so early, there's a lot of education required and it's complex. Money is complex. Bitcoin is complex. That's why I always say it's going to take generations to change this. It's going to take, my kids who are, tweens, are still, they're learning about it. They're curious about it, but they're going to grow up, around this earlier than most people will. Right. So it's going to take these generations to kind of really understand it. And, it's the same with the internet. Like I look at my mom who's in her 70s, and she the internet to her is Facebook and messages and YouTube. Like that's what the internet is to that generation, and what's the internet to my kids is way different, like they've grown up on a digital world. So to me, those are the changes that it takes, right? It's like those younger generations are more comfortable with digital transactions because they played Roblox and they traded, Robux, with their friends online. And so I never did that as a kid and my parents never did that as a kid, but my kids are trading, internet magic money in these games, as young children. And so, that's going to have a huge impact when they start to enter the real world, and start to be like, how do I make money and what is money and all those things. So yeah, we're super early.
and for them, digital money will be so second nature. Like it will be so natural for them. They're like, of course my money is digital. Why would I have something physical? Like that's so inconvenient.
Yeah. Yeah. I also think what's interesting on that too, like them knowing digital money, like I watch my kids when they play Roblox and stuff like that. And some of these games, like, the money that they're dealing with is massive. Like they'll be building a store and they're dealing with like higher numbers. And I kind of talk about this in terms of like Satoshis, and like 100 million, Satoshis in a Bitcoin. Like we, when I grew up, we talked in $1, $2, $5, $10. Like we never thought about millions and billions and that. Like it just wasn't, those numbers as it relates to money were just way out there. Whereas these kids, they're like, oh, I run this pizza shop and the pizza shop I've made, $30 million in my pizza shop. Like their unit kind of understanding is way higher, if that makes sense. So like, when they start to go like, oh, how much is this coffee? Oh, it's 5,000 Satoshis for a coffee, right? Because it's $5. Like, I see it as $5. That whole concept of them going, oh yeah, I'll buy a coffee for 5,000 Satoshis. And my mom would be like, 5,000? Wow, that's expensive. It's like, no, that's the equivalent of $5. Like that unit kind of paradigm is shifting for them, right? Because these games operate in such a higher, they use the big numbers. So I found that to be interesting. I think that will help with the shift where it's just going to be normal for them. Like when you start to want to price things in Bitcoin, for us, we're converting, we're still fiat minded where we're like 5,000 is $5. Whereas, they're going to be like, it's 5,000 Satoshis, right? They're just going to understand that kind of unit of account rather than having to convert to what the fiat equivalent is. So again, generations, it's going to take time.
Absolutely. One other topic that you brought up, maybe as an exit topic here. How do you look at Nostr? And do you use it a lot? Do you see a big potential in it?
I definitely do. I'm actually doing a talk at our meetup on Monday about Nostr for beginners. And so I always like to say this. I think I heard this in somebody else's talk was like, Bitcoin is not controlled by anybody and it works, right? It's money that nobody controls and it works. And Nostr is like, a network that nobody controls, a communication network that nobody controls, but it works. And so, right now we're seeing, like Nostr, it's really about relays, right? It's a decentralized protocol, like a messaging protocol that basically, you have a whole bunch of nodes out there. And like when you post a message or a piece of content, it's posted to all these nodes, right? And the idea is like, oh, hey, someone could go and take down one of the nodes, but my message is already on all these other nodes, right? So it's like you can't censor it, and nobody's kind of in charge of it. There's no centralized kind of authority. So I think there's huge parallels to Bitcoin in the self-sovereignty, in the, permissionless. It's about having a digital identity that you own and that's portable, right? So I could, it works off of, public and private keys. My public key is like my username and my private key is my password. And I can take that identity with me anywhere. So I can log into a variety of applications and that identity and all the stuff I've done and all the communication and notes and information that I've posted on relays can now be accessed, from whatever app anywhere. So I think it's hugely powerful in that regard. It's taking, again, same ethos as Bitcoin, where it's the power is going back to the people. I'm going to control my digital identity and my digital content. Whereas today we live in a world where Google and Apple and, everybody else controls your digital identity. They can turn it off. They can delete you. They can restrict you and all those things. So Nostr really right now, the main focus has really been on kind of like an X or a Twitter-esque kind of platform where, microblogging, I'm posting, content and, it's out there. They've adopted or kind of brought Bitcoin into it where now and integrated Lightning into it where you can, instead of just giving a heart to somebody or a thumbs up, you can zap them Satoshis. And you can send them 1 Satoshi or 1,000 or 100,000 Satoshis, and it's instant. And so I really like that from our heavily addicted social media society. I think, who's, everybody's an influencer. I think, we're in the early days where, influencers can start to remove the middleman, right? Like you right now, when you're putting something out on YouTube, an advertiser has to spend money with YouTube, and then you're doing, your content creation, and then YouTube's giving you a fraction of that for your creation. Like you're talking about Bitcoin, and hopefully advertisers are showing up on your videos, and you're getting a portion of that. So that's how influencers are earning their income on YouTube, on TikTok, on X, on Facebook. Whereas Nostr, it's like I can go and post a meme on there right now, and if somebody likes it, they can give me 10 Satoshis, and it goes into my Lightning wallet, and now I have that value. Nostr doesn't get a share. It's peer-to-peer, peer-to-peer relationships between influencers and the consumer of that content. Same thing on Fountain. I don't know if you put this on the Fountain app where you run your podcasts. Same thing. If someone likes your podcast, you can just pay them directly, and you're basically having that peer-to-peer transaction of value for value. So I think that Nostr's really taking that, I guess, and pushing that, and I think more people come to Nostr for that, right? They're kind of like, oh, wow, I can get paid directly. And you're, again, removing the third party out of the influencer model, which I think is very attractive. But again, super early days. There's not a lot of people, big influencers on there. It's very Bitcoin, very developer, very open source kind of focused. But I think that's evolving. Like people have made Instagram replicas, like anything could be built on. If you think about social media, they built like Nostr Nests, which is like X Spaces or Twitter Spaces kind of thing, or the Clubhouse kind of model. Same thing. You can zap people that are in those conversations, and so I think that's a really interesting business model, a really interesting kind of use case that will bring more people into Bitcoin, because they're going to get the value. Now I've got these Satoshis. What do I do with it? What is Bitcoin? It starts to, again, bring that discord. And it comes at it from not a money place. Like, hey, read the Bitcoin standard, learn about money, get off of fiat. It's more like, hey, you're paying a whole bunch of money to YouTube, and, you could have all that value to yourself. So I think that's really exciting to me. And we're really early days. Nostr's only a few years old, and it's getting huge. Jack Dorsey's really pushing for it. He's been investing in it. The guy that Fiat Jaff that started Nostr and wrote the protocol, like, he got like 14 Bitcoin to start developing this. And we're seeing now like the Primal app and people building, clients for this, and even people building relays. The guy that was the developer that built Nodeless, like a Lightning SaaS product that got shut down by the Canadian government, he moved over to Nostr, and now he's building relays. And it's this world of like, again, it's a new technology stack that is fully like ready to use Bitcoin as its kind of medium of exchange. So I don't know, it's very exciting to me. I think there's a lot of cool things going on there.
Interesting. For me as a creator, the biggest thing is actually the interoperability of it, where imagine you come on YouTube and you get a reply, and I write back to them, then I open Twitter, and then I have the same thread there, and I can reply back there, and it's all like one protocol in one network, and it's just different clients to that, which is really big for me as a creator, because as a creator you always go through the hustle. Like, you have 5 notification lists, you have 5 places where you have to upload a video, you have 5. It's really mind boggling of like I have to be here and here and here and here and here, and it's like, okay, I want to have one thing, and if you have Nostr, you can actually focus on like one client. If you don't like that client anymore, just switch on to another client, but you don't lose the followers, you don't lose the history, you don't lose anything. And this for me is the biggest advantage, the openness and the interoperability of the Nostr protocol. Of course, it's great that we can also zap each other and have the censorship resistance. But what I think will bring a lot of people in there is the openness, because all of a sudden, what if Twitter tomorrow decides, yeah, let's also plug into Nostr. Like, he can have Twitter, X, the same way it works right now, and just plug into Nostr also, and has more content. And this kind of network effect and game theory is really interesting, because I always think of like, okay, why should people adopt it? Because most people don't get banned on social media. Like, most people don't go through that hardship, because most people just consume. Like 99% of people just consume on the social medias. So I'm really looking forward to Nostr, and the developments are going fast, but it's still so early in that regard. Like 10 years earlier than Bitcoin is.
Yeah, I agree. You're right. You're talking about like the digital identity you take with you, and it was interesting when as I play with new apps and stuff like that. You're right. How your content, like everything comes with you, like I was like, oh, I'll check out, I think it's called Olas. It's like the Instagram replica, and I logged into that, I bring over my public key and my private key, and I get into that, and it's like, all my content's already there. Now it's formatted in an Instagram view. So it's like, instead of me like, okay, I've been posting on, on Twitter and all of that. And it's like, oh, I'm now going to create, I've been posting images there. I go over to this new platform. All my content's already there. So those that are on, the clients and the consumers that are on that Olas app, instantly have all my content from my other apps. Right? It's just reformatted in an Instagram kind of view, right? And so they're just looking at all the images I posted. So you're right. I think that whole interoperability and the digital identity of being able to take your content to whatever platform, I think we're going to see really cool development in that space, right? Where we're going to start to combine all these, the TikToks and the Instagram and the the Twitter and all these things will just, combine into new platforms that will just be very interesting. So yeah, it's going to be interesting. It's very early days. It's very clunky. The websites and the clients are still in that, early development phase. But it's fascinating. I love it. That's where, to me, that's cutting edge stuff, and it's really interesting to see where it's going.
Really cool. I asked now, I think it didn't do it when you first time were here. I think it was something that developed late in the podcast. I asked now every guest of mine, what can we learn from you besides Bitcoin?
That's a good question. What can we learn? I'm a dad. I've got 3 kids. I live way up in the north in Manitoba. I'm in Canada, and it's very cold here. What else can you learn? I've been in tech for a long time. I've been passionate about technology since like the late 90s is when I really kind of dove into things. Really love that. I'm a snowboarder. I'm a mountain biker when I can get out to the mountains. And I just love to go on adventures. I love to camp and get out into the wilderness. So I'm a big nature guy. When I'm not in the tech world, I just want to be disconnected and out in nature. So, that's just, I'm a regular guy, that just, loves Bitcoin, loves his family, and, just wants to kind of, do good in the world. So
I love that. Yeah, that's great. We have an end routine in the podcast, as you know, where the previous guest is asking a question for the next guest without knowing who the next guest is. And the previous guest asked you the question. I have to define one word for you after the question. But do you think fiat will go away? And he is defining fiat as not the currency, but the way of life.
Will fiat go away? I think this ties into the conversation we had earlier. I think it's going to be relegated to museums and collector memorabilia. I think, I think we will evolve, just like the horse and carriage. People still like to jump on a horse and go riding through the woods. And maybe, at Christmas time, they're pulling people around in a sleigh. Like, some things never go away, but I think we're going to evolve. And I think, technology changes, just like cash hasn't gone fully away. We've got debit cards and credit cards, but cash is still there. These things take time. So I don't think it'll ever completely vanish from our world. But it will, we're definitely going to take a big dent out of it in the next 100 years.
Absolutely. Really cool. Thank you so much, Craig, for being on. Before I let you go, where can people find you, ask your questions, and reach out to you?
So obviously you can find me on X, Craig on Bitcoin. I'm on the Primal app as well on Nostr. Look for On Bitcoin. Same thing on most of the social platforms. I'm also on Substack, where I've got a newsletter where I talk all things Bitcoin, about adoption, all kinds of interesting articles there. So you can definitely find me there. And also a big plug for our Manitoba meetup. Always looking to grow our meetup here locally in Manitoba. So you can find that also on my social channels as a link to those meetups. So come join it if you're in Manitoba or Winnipeg. We'd love to have you out. We meet every second Monday just to talk Bitcoin. And yeah, we'd love to have everybody. Welcome to all. So yeah.
I love Thanks that every second Monday. That's a lot. I like that. Really cool. Perfect. And sorry. Go ahead.
Every second Monday of the month. So once a month we meet. But yeah. No, just I wanted to say.
Oh, okay. Every second Monday of the month. Oh, I thought like every second Monday. So like it's every second week, basically. Interesting.
Yeah.
Perfect. And yeah, thank you so much, Greg, for being on. Also, thank you so much for everyone that is watching and listening, for joining us today. As always, I'll be back tomorrow with another episode. Bye-bye.